Consider the seemingly simple act of waking up. Most people would argue that staying in bed or getting up is a choice. However, if one were truly committed to making no choices, the initial moments of consciousness present an immediate, insurmountable hurdle. Even the absence of action, such as remaining asleep, could be interpreted as a choice not to engage with the day. This is where the no-choice paradox emerges. The very definition of not choosing implies a decision has been made to abstain from selection. It's a recursive loop, a mental Ouroboros, where the act of rejecting choice becomes a choice itself. To navigate this, we must define what no choice truly means in this context. It means a complete, passive submission to external forces, an absolute lack of internal deliberation or preference guiding any action or inaction. The brain, a decision-making organ, constantly evaluates, predicts, and selects. From the subconscious regulation of breathing and heart rate to the conscious selection of breakfast cereal, choice is fundamental to its operation. Removing this function would effectively disable the very mechanism of interaction with reality. The notion of a human existing without making choices challenges the core principles of agency and free will. It's not just about what you do, but what your body, your subconscious, and your environment dictate when your conscious will is utterly removed from the equation. The distinction between a conscious choice and an automatic biological response blurs significantly. Even involuntary muscle twitches or reflexive blinks, while not conscious choices, are still responses, a form of interaction with the environment. True no choice implies an absolute inertness, a state of being entirely dictated by external physics and chemistry, devoid of any internal processing that resembles a decision. Imagine the first non-choice of the day after the initial paradox. If the alarm rings, would one hit snooze, turn it off, or simply let it ring indefinitely? All of these are choices. To genuinely make no choice, the alarm would simply continue its incessant blare, an external stimulus with no internal decision to interact with it. The sound would persist until its battery died, or it was physically silenced by another entity. This absence of action, rather than being a choice, is a pure reaction, or rather, a non-reaction to a stimulus. This passivity extends to basic bodily functions. When hunger pangs strike, the conscious decision to eat is absent. The body might experience discomfort, but without a guiding choice, there would be no movement towards food. Similarly, the urge to use the restroom would go unaddressed. The consequences of this non-action are not pretty, leading to severe physiological distress and, eventually, a forced bodily response. The physical sensation of thirst would simply remain, leading to dehydration. The fundamental drives that govern survival, like hunger and thirst, typically compel choices to satisfy them. Without that internal drive translating into action, the body remains static. Even the simple act of opening one's eyes after waking is a choice. It's a choice to engage with visual input. Without it, the individual would remain in a perpetual state of eyes closed, relying solely on other senses or simply existing in darkness. The brain's natural tendency to seek novelty and information would be stifled. The day, rather than unfolding through a series of interactions, would become a sequence of unattended stimuli, a passive observation of biological and environmental pressures with no active participation. Stepping out into the world, if such a non-choice were even possible, presents a new set of challenges. Social interactions are built upon a foundation of reciprocal choices. A greeting requires a choice to acknowledge and respond. A conversation is a continuous stream of choices: what to say, how to react, when to listen. Without these, social engagement becomes impossible. The individual would appear unresponsive, almost catatonic, a mere physical presence in a dynamic social landscape. Imagine being at a crosswalk. The light turns green. A conscious choice dictates stepping forward. Without it, the individual would remain rooted to the spot, regardless of the flow of traffic or the urging of fellow pedestrians. This is not defiance, it is simply an absence of the decision to move. The world would continue to flow around them, treating them as an inert obstacle. This immobility would have immediate and potentially dangerous consequences, demonstrating the fundamental necessity of choice for self-preservation in a complex environment. Even mundane public behaviors, like choosing a seat on a bus or deciding which aisle to walk down in a grocery store, are choices. Without them, the person would simply stand wherever they happen to be or drift aimlessly without any directed purpose. This lack of intentional movement would lead to constant collisions, blockages, and general disruption, not out of malice, but out of an absolute inability to adapt or respond. The absence of choice would transform the individual into a living, breathing, but utterly passive object, subject to the whims of physics and the frustrations of an actively choosing society. They would be a walking, or rather standing, paradox in a world designed for agency. Consider the realm of employment. Showing up for work, performing tasks, and interacting with colleagues all involve a continuous series of choices. Without these, the individual would simply not engage. A scheduled meeting would proceed without their participation, emails would go unanswered, and assigned tasks would remain untouched. This isn't laziness, it's a profound absence of the internal mechanism that initiates and sustains action in a professional context. The legal ramifications are equally profound. Contracts, for instance, are formalized choices. From accepting terms of service to signing a lease, choices define our legal standing. Without the capacity to choose, one would be unable to adhere to any legal obligation. A rental agreement would be violated by remaining in an apartment without having chosen to pay rent or even to move out. This isn't a deliberate act of breaking the law, but rather an automatic failure to comply due to the inability to make the necessary choices. Even in public spaces, certain actions are mandated by law, such as stopping at a red light. Without the choice to stop, the individual would simply continue moving, leading to immediate legal infractions and potentially severe accidents. The concept of informed consent becomes meaningless. Any medical procedure, any legal document, any interaction requiring agreement would be impossible, leaving the individual entirely vulnerable. The day would devolve into a series of unintended consequences, a cascade of defaults, where every societal structure designed around the premise of individual agency would simply break down in their presence. They would become a living embodiment of the null state, a void in the decision-making fabric of society.